I would now request Rohan Shivkumar, Dean of the Bachelor of Architecture program at KRVIA, to introduce the colloquium and open the online exhibition. I would also like to request the attendees that in case you have any queries or comments during any of the sessions, you may please feel free to post them here in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to be introducing the idea that we've had for the colloquium before we start this off. So just hello to everyone again. And it is giving me great pleasure to invite everyone today to the annual Design Dissertation Colloquium at the KRVIA. This is an event where we at the school get an opportunity to think about the issues that concern our students as they step out into the world of practice. The design dissertation, as we all know, is a space where they kind of make their intentions manifest. I find that word itself very interesting, the word manifest. To make manifest is to make visible. And in a thesis, the students make visible their intentions as practitioners. In some ways, every thesis is a manifesto, a call to arms. In the thesis, they demonstrate not only their skills as designers of buildings, but also their hopes about what the world should become. The thesis that they put forth is a reaction to the state of the world and a claim towards an alternative possibility. There's in each thesis a sort of what if, perhaps, maybe, tentative claims made by them on a threshold about which direction they would like to head toward. And what find. The collection of theses seen together can be seen as a sort of kaleidoscope of these different futures that lie on the horizon. Apparitions that are meant to challenge our presumptions of what it means to be in the world, and as architects, what it means to make in the world that we are living. The KRVIA Colloquium, then, is a space where we discuss all these possibilities of being and of making. We hope that these discussions can provide us with, a sort of mirror, a space for reflecting on who we are and what we want to become. A space for reflection, that's what mirrors are. The Design Dissertation Colloquium can be that mirror that can help us at the school reveal our own presumptions, challenge any preconceptions that we may have, and provide us with new horizons to explore. Every year, we have with us generous, sharp, and incisive minds to help us get along, help us along thinking these ideas through. We hope to have a discussion today that will be exciting, stimulating, annoying, disturbing, and entertaining. And we are glad to have all of you along with us to participate in these discussions. With this, I think I'll hand it over to George to introduce our panelists. Thank you, George.
Thanks, Rohan. Hello, everyone. And with that, to start off an exciting day, I would like to introduce the three panelists. Definitely, there is a great contribution as academicians, as practitioners from the fields that they represent and also come from. So first is Veda Torur Koleri. She's a visual artist living between Patiam and Greater Noida and Vadodara. She works with drawing, video, photography, and writing. She's interested in the ecological context in which she lives and works, and through her practice is attentive to processes of sedimentation, decay, accumulation, and growth. She has a close relationship with plants and animals in her environment, which drives her to actively engage with the natural world and work with it. Veda was a participant in the 2018 Peers Shared Program at Khoj International Artists Association, the fourth edition of Kochi Muzuri's Biennale in 2018, and also a fellow at the Home Workspace Program 2018-19 at Ashkal Alwan, Beirut, for which she received a scholarship from the Inlax Shivdasani Foundation. She has a BA in Anthropology and Psychology from St. Xavier's College in Mumbai, an undergraduate program, a diploma in Art and Design from Srishti School of Art, Design and Technology, and a Masters of Fine Arts from Shivnagar University. Welcome, Veda. Now moving on to Srivatsan, is an architect, an urban designer, and currently heads the Center for Research on Architecture and Urbanism, CEPT University, Ahmedabad. Previously, he was the academic director of the university taught for a decade in Chennai, and worked for about 8 years as a senior journalist with the Hindu, a national newspaper. His research and writings include the themes of urban history, planning and policy, and contemporary practices. His recent work includes the study of Chennai housing, dynamics and determinants for Tamil Nadu State Planning Commission. Srivatsan's publications include the co-edited book titled The Contemporary Hindu Temple Fragments for a History, published by Marg Publications. Welcome, Srivatsan. And a third panelist is Biju Kuriakose, co-founded Architecture Red, an architecture and urban design firm based out of Chennai, India. Having studied architecture in Mumbai, Biju received his master's degree in architecture and urban design from Pratt Institute, New York. Red's current projects include designing public streets and public spaces for the entire neighborhood of Adyar within the city of Chennai, developing master plan for a new 150-acre mixed-use township in Panvel, that is in Navi Mumbai, master plans for mixed-use development in Tamil Nadu, a mixed-use master plan for the city of Salha in Oman, and housing projects of varying scales in Chennai, Bangalore, and Trivandrum, as well as multiple institution buildings within the Crescent and Hindustan universities in Chennai. Prior to finding Architecture Red, Biju was an associate and design director at FX Paul Architects, a leading architectural planning and urban design firm based out of New York. Biju has been invited to several prestigious forums, including the Metropolitan Waterfront Alliance, New York, Pratt Institute, and Columbia University, New York, as a speaker and studio critic. He was also invited to be part of the Goethe Institute's visitor program 2017 in Germany, looking at water issues and studying the relationship of water to communities. He has been a member of the board of review at SEPT Universities in Ahmedabad since 2018, and he currently teaches at the School of Architecture Planning in Anna University, Chennai, and is an external studio critic. Welcome, Biju. And with that, we can begin our first session, and I will now invite Karan Rane to take over.
Hello. So the first, Josh, I can stop spotlighting you. Just 1 second. Yeah, hi. So the first session has 3 students, and they are Anuja Jain, Ishita Kohli, and Saivisha. So we will first begin with the first project, Anuja Jain, which is called Within, Around, and Beyond. So in my own words, I've tried to sum up what this thesis is about. So this project reconceptualizes the apartment housing typology as a reproduction of the city rather than a space of home. Thus, the apartment here is imagined not as an escape from the city, but a part of it, an extension of the outside urban experience. So with this very short intro, I would request the video of thesis project to be played, and that will be followed up by a discussion with the students and the panel. So can we please have the video?
Thesis topic is Within, Around, and Beyond, an experiment with the apartment typology. The thesis began with the questioning on the homogeneity of the housing landscape in the city, which further led to an inquiry into the nature of apartments, a typology that has evolved as the new housing normative. As a result of the increased commodification, it is treated as a means of status symbol or accumulating wealth, completely neglecting the relationship between the people, the home, and the city at large. Today's developer-driven model has reduced the house to a mere commodity, an object for sale in the market, creating a demand and supply relationship. This transformation could be understood through the adverse effects of the various laws and regulations, the adaptation of the liberalization policy, leading to the shift of the housing control from the state to private market. FSI and the DCR, which were introduced as planning tools, now have become the most important financial tool. Apartment as a typology has led to a major shift in the lifestyle of the people and thus have paved a completely different image for the social construct within the domestic realm. This has created a distinction between the house as a commodity and home as an appropriate territory, reducing the resident to a mere user of an object. Home as a relationship. Home is a dialogue between the people and the space, thus enabling the whole as an appreciation of the complementary characters. This relationship was understood further through the theory of reciprocity by Aldo and Ike, which says that the space gets its recognition based on its engagement with the people and the surrounding space, and thus gets classified into big, small, inside, outside, public, private, house, and the city. These twin or the Dio phenomena are relative concepts, mental realities, which changes with the scale, environment, and perception. He imagines a similar kind of relationship between the house and the city, such that the house must be like a city and a city like a house, where the urban space is imagined as an externalized domesticity and the home as an internalized urbanity. Based on the theory, a few tools of reciprocities were inferred to understand the quality of the spaces, which are classified into spatial and social dialects. The spatial dialects includes the scale, movement, and inclusion. Scale deals with the idea of the scale of the human with respect to the built form. Movement deals with the pattern of the movement and the layout. Inclusion deals with the idea of the inclusivity that the space has to offer. Social dialects includes association and programmatic interaction, where the former deals with the relationship between the people, the spaces that are provided for it, whereas the latter deal with the compatibility of the programs both at the domestic and the urban level. Based on this, 5 sites were selected based upon the site conditions, time periods, typologies, and regulations that govern it. Each site was studied in detail at the dwelling as well as the urban level through the lens of reciprocity via scale, association, movement, programmatic interaction, and inclusion to understand the quality of the spaces, the movement layouts, the edge conditions, the interaction between the programs, the scale, basically the degree of the reciprocity that each site offers between the home, the people, and its urban realm. As a conclusion to the study, a few strategies were evolved, such that how can the scale be broken down, how can the idea of stacking be replaced with layering, shifting to an integrated approach rather than a segregated approach. Hence, the architectural intent deals with the deconstruction of apartments, allowing for an experimentation with the typology, generating an ambivalent relationship between the people, the dwelling, and the neighborhood at large. The reason for selecting BIT Charles Parel was that it is one of the few lands which have not been converted into high-end product of the market, and it is also characterized by several activities and programs around it, such as a school, market, railway workshop, and quarters, and industrial warehousing along its edge. This is the Google image showing the site along with its surrounding landscape. The site has an area of around 11,500 square meters, where the consumed FSI is 0.94 and the allowed FSI is 4. A study of the land use pattern was done to understand the different nature of the housing there in the vicinity, such as the railway quarters, best quarters, chawls, mahada, and the developer buildings. Besides, it has an easy access to different nature of market and institutions. An informal market runs along its edge, also known as the Parel market. In terms of the connectivity, the site is very well connected with the Hinmata flyover on the east and the Elphiston Bridge on the north, leading to the station extending upon the corporate office zone. A study of the activity pattern was done to understand the peak hours and the concentrated spots of activity throughout the day. The site has 2 chawls, the BIT chawls, which is a completely residential with 384 units, and the Parel Post Office Gully, which has a combination of live and work conditions with a workshop and garage along its length. The frontal street accommodates the retail and an informal market. A qualitative analysis was also done to understand the usage of the corridor, street space between the building, relationship with the streets, movement patterns, and the extension of inclusivity that it offered. The site has an historical importance as it is a home to Babasaheb Ambedkar, and therefore a portion of the site is reserved as a memorial. Thus, the major program is housing with the rehab and the sales component, with a small portion dedicated to the co-living units in response to the worker housing in the vicinity. Other community-based programs are also proposed, such as a community hall, cafe, and a shared green open space. Ancillary programs includes the public library, which is proposed as a memorial, the workshops, the local business, the retail market, and the garage. As a part of the development plan, a part of the chawl is reserved for a school and the rear part of the site is reserved for a playground. Therefore, from the site study, it was inferred to retain the existing nature of the internal streets and the informal market edge. Along with that, an extension of the pedestrian movement is proposed between the 2 bridges to increase accessibility, which is further enhanced by the memorial and the commercial edge. Reflecting upon the research, the main concept of the housing revolved around the idea of imagining the urban space as an externalized domesticity and the home as an internalized urbanity through the inferred tools of reciprocity, such that a corridor could be treated as a street or the urban space can be treated as a large living room. As a result, the final master plan strategy combines the data from the study and the reflection of the theory, where the volumes get scaled up in response to the immediate context so as to retain the nature of the streets. A vehicular access is proposed across the site to increase the accessibility to the school proposed. Perpendicular to it, a pedestrian public access is proposed, connecting the commercial edge to the green space through the housing. As an extension to the street, voids have been created of different nature, which guides the form of the intervention. The frontal void accommodates the public activities, the central void accommodates the garage and the workshop related activities, and the last one accommodates the communal related activities, which largely divides the site into living, kitchen, and bedroom at the level, each catering to different zones. The massing gets scaled up in response to the site and further gets molded up as per site strategies, such that the last block bends responding to the green space, the front block allows for connection between the two streets, and the central block aligns with the vehicular access. The volume gets further broken up to create internal movement within the building. Along with the building, the ground plane also gets lifted up from the either sides to break down the volume of the building. Lastly, a frontal block is added to retain the edge along the main road with the idea of layering the volume with the public corridor at a higher level. So this is the final volumetric, where the blue indicates the public access to the housing, where one is at a 3-meter level and the other one is a 6-meter level, catering to the public corridor at the 9-meter level. The ground gets lifted up at a 3-meter and a 6-meter interval from the either sides. The yellow represents the library and the orange represents the commercial shops, where the brown represents the workshop. The ground floor is designed in a way that the front void represents the urban living room, accommodating the market from where the two public access starts. Majorly, the central is reserved for the housing amenities, with the public access mounting on both sides at higher levels. Space is created for various activities to be shared within the neighborhood. For access, 2 entry points are provided, which are connected to the lobby area via the path in blue. If you're a visitor, the access is limited to the market in front and 2 public corridors on the both sides. The vehicle access is underground and across the site with 2 entry gates at the basement level for the building. The access of the truck is limited up to the workshop zone. At the block level, the main idea was forming the internal streets as a higher level, which are characterized by single and double height with a variety of breakout spaces created along its length. Voids are created for interflow connection visually as well as physically, thus forming a long street with changing characteristics. This is a typical flow plan where the long street is formed with changing widths and height. The circulation course acts as a transition space. The nature of the shared space is changing throughout the length such that it acts like a terrace space along the family units or as a community kitchen along the co-living units, acting as an extension of the home. This shows the cluster of a 350 plus 450 square feet unit where the double and the single heights are internally connected via a staircase, and the presence of the internal windows allow for overlooking, adding a character to these streets. These are a few views to the corridor where it is used as a space of festivals or a place of leisure or a space of shared terrace space. For units, 4 sizes were taken into consideration, that is 350, 450, 600 and 750 square feet. The duplex was inspired from the existing typology, which incorporates the interflow connections. Small shared spaces were also created to allow corridor to act as an inward balcony. The units are designed in a pair where largely the layout is such that the living and the kitchen are combined to form a large public area. For co-living, individual rooms with a shared common space are provided, with the upper level overlooking into the common space. Similarly, a combination of 450 plus 350, 350 plus 600, and 2 units of 750 interlocked with each other with a 450 square feet unit are evolved. The total number of units are 529 and the FSI consumed is 3.4. For structural system, a set of cast in situ shear walls are used in combination with the precast bubble decking system. The rooftop acts like a terrace garden as an extension to the idea of internalized urbanity. The voids allow for ventilation to the internal streets and leads to stack ventilation at a higher level. The usage of the precast walls allows for flexibility for the fenestration as a balcony or a sitting space or a flower bed. This is a section through the frontal block which shows a series of double and single height streets with different activities incorporated within them. It also represents the public access that passes through the center, creating an internal public street at a lower level. This section is cut through the central block adjoining the market. It shows how the domestic realm interacts with the public edge, that is the market on one side, and the private edge, that is the podium terraces, on the other side simultaneously. This is a section that is cut through the last block where, as a response to the green open spaces, create single corridor streets overlooking into the terraces formed at the mid-level as an extension to the urbanity. At the lower level, it allows for an interaction between the domestic realm and the public walkway. So, to conclude the project, it majorly revolved around the idea of housing extensive to the city, such as the domestic realm extends into the urban space and vice versa, through the tools of reciprocity, that is, scale, movement, association, inclusion, and programmatic interaction. Lastly, here are a few views where you enter the building through a double height void, which leads you to an internal street characterized with commercial shops at the ground level, leading to the market on the right, where a separate space is provided for the formal and informal market. Moving further, you witness the underground vehicle access with the public access overlooking at a higher level. As you move forward, you reach the shared green open spaces, which is used commonly by the people in the neighborhood. Another view towards the workshop zone when you walk through the other public access. Finally, a view through a terrace, which tries to create an extended green open space as an extension to the internalized urbanity.
Thanks a lot, Mamta, for playing. Is the student around? Can you please turn on your camera and your mic? Anuj, are you there? Also, I would request Mamta, can you please turn on her camera if that's possible?
Yes,
Anuja's. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I request the three panelists to turn on their cameras if that's possible? So this session is imagined not really as a jury, but more as a discussion on the thesis that you just saw, and if you would like to share your thoughts on her work, and if there can be some kind of an exchange between us and the people who are listening, that would be great. So, Srivatsan sir, can we start with you?
Sure. Thanks. That was a good presentation, and even while I reviewed the drawings, and I found that you had quite sort of well worked, in terms of design resolution and all that. And what was also quite impressive is that you tried to carry forward your central idea of though you're building an apartment, you're actually building part of the city, and now in terms of design, it's not completely autonomous. It sort of makes its linkages and so on, which many of the designs would do. But what you're trying to push that forward is to see if you were to conceptualize your housing community as part of the neighborhood. So essentially, we are trying to find some elegant solution for a vertical neighborhood without losing its horizontal connections. So, and also the graphic quality, etc., were very well done. And I found one yours amongst the many entries to be amongst the well worked out solutions. So those are very positive things about. But to me, this is my broad observation about it. But I think the idea that you're trying to push is how do we think about rebuilding an apartment? When can we conceptualize it as a vertical neighborhood and not really as a bunch of buildings and activities within a compound of sort? And I could see that both in your qualitative illustrations and also in your diagram that you're trying to weave that, which are all good, and also your design strategies are very well demonstrated. My only question was sometimes there is always a desire to create some oasis, sort of shut oneself out from a very bustling thing. So while we can have design connections with the city, but sometimes I wonder whether our places of residence functionally should be a little autonomous. I mean, I'm just provocatively putting, just to hear your views. So, for example, I would like to live in a relatively a quieter place of sort. Of course, desiring it it's not wrong to desire even in Bombay that when you hit home, the home and the city is sort of in a sense separated in a more, well, I can have a very healthy social life within the community, but almost making it very porous, and almost one gets a feeling that as if there are multiple buildings are interconnected. So whether functionally speaking, some kind of autonomy or isolation of being a residential, would it be desirable? And we should make this engagement with the city more at a sort of a physical level and still keep that distinction between place we live and place we move out, was one question that recurred. Because while it's wonderful to see those great activity pictures, but sometimes it's also slightly worrying. So, I mean, I've moved from one dense part to another dense part. Something like that was of my concern. I mean, I have a few points, but I'll just wait for the others to also pitch in.
Yeah.
Oh, sir, thank you. Can we go ahead with Biju, if that's okay?
Yeah, so Anuja, a lot of good things have been, positive things have been already articulated by Srivatsan, and the fact that you are among the 8 shortlists means that we obviously saw a lot of positive things in your project and your proposals. So I think like Srivatsan said, it's a wonderful project. The only thing that I kind of felt is that. I felt the project completely missed a conclusion in the sense that what are you trying to articulate here? The project almost wanted a post-design analysis. I'm not sure if this project is completely within the existing building regulations. Is that true? Is you work with the existing? So then the first question that come to my mind is that why is it not practiced more? Right? What are the challenges of practicing it more? And for me, your project is not so much about the design, but what you use design as a kind of a hypothesis testing to come up with what are the parameters then one can set to kind of make this lot more, if you truly believe, generic. Because as an individual architect, I can do a wonderful project, but the city doesn't change. Right, and our change happens when we use our projects as a way to start to influence policies, building regulations, so that these things then start to become a mandate. So you kind of create a base scenario within which everybody then start to set. So when you go vertically up, if you look at our building regulations, I don't know too much about Bombay, but if you look at most of the cities that I practice in, I know that most of the open space community regulations are based on the idea of land and not with the density. So you can build on a land with 10 FSI, and the adjacent land you can build 2 FSI. Both ask you to leave 10% of the land as open space regulations. It has nothing to do with density, and this is what you need to critique. So if you start to kind of then reimagine these spaces, then you have to resolve the idea of density, and your regulations have to respond to that density. So does that mean that every time you go up, every 3 floors, you need to have so much square feet of social spaces, which then kind of, however, whatever form it may get articulated, but the idea of providing X amount of social spaces, livable spaces, all kind of then adding up to kind of create that object, and like Korea said, it's not about how tall the object goes, but what goes into that object, and the notion of what you call as a home. Right, and a home in that in an urban context is the community. It's not the unit that you live in. And like Srivatsan was saying, that unit is probably the most private of the spaces. But in many of the urban communities, especially when it comes to these smaller units, etc., your living room is really your community. And that's what it comes through even in your projects, right? And it becomes about that idea of shared space, because I can't afford that large living room. And hence 5 of us are going to come together and put 5 square foot each to make it 20 square feet. And then we start to share. And that is where the idea of sustainability comes in as well. So I think for me, it's a wonderful project, but it completely lacks a conclusion. You have to, because your design is a way to kind of arrive at something much larger. And I think you need to kind of, and we need to, especially at an academic level, look at projects as a way to kind of then go back and kind of analyze it and come up with things which can then improve the sort of the nature of the city and kind of start. So your projects, I mean, the larger contribution of the project is in that and not in just solving one design problem. And I think that's, and you have set the stage for it. I think it would be wonderful if you really kind of take it up and start to look at it from that perspective. And this is true with, I think there is one more project which will come later on, Sideways. I think a lot of these comments are common with that as well. And I just wanted to kind of put it out there. So, but good effort, very good effort.
Thank
Thanks a
you.
lot, Vishu. Rita, hi. So can we hear you out? And I hope the parasite isn't too dangerous. I really hope so.
I hope so too. Yeah, so I really enjoy the research phase of it, where you're talking about, where you're kind of firstly like the intent, or like where the project is coming from, is something that I find again valuable for us to discuss. And this research phase where you talk about those dialectical kind of combinations, that's really interesting. I mean, I like that you've approached it from that point of view, where you're considering both factors. But at the same time, I'd also say that, when all of the, like your research is based on the chawl and stuff. So those are sort of those kinds of neighborhoods are kind of built through years of people living in them. So the relationships that are formed are through that. So again, I think this comment was made even before this. It's like, how would you kind of impose a model like this and expect people to just occupy it, is like a question. I mean, it's something that I'm sort of skeptical of. The intention is something I get, but I think it still needs to, like, the dialectics that you're talking about also comes into play, or needs to be taken into consideration, I think, when you're conceiving of this, where there is some space for, because privacy can become an issue in such a thing. When you talk about common passages and stuff, privacy and even safety, if we think about a city, So, I mean, these are just questions that come up for me. Like, it shouldn't, like the design just or the vision seems like, I like the intention of the vision, but I just worry that it can become too tightly kind of framed and very tightly expecting a particular sort of occupancy or even a particular kind of reaction, or a response. So it's like, I think there needs to be still, I mean, some scope for the people that occupy the space to kind of be able to create the neighborhood or the community aspect of it. So how I mean, just something to think about is, how would you do that, or how would you create those kinds of spaces of allow for that even the possibility of aggression and stuff coming into play, So it's just, yeah.
Thanks a lot. I mean, the student, if you want to respond to.
Yeah, I would like to respond. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
So firstly, thank you so much for your feedback. Firstly, I would like to answer Srivatson's question regarding the balance between the privacy and the publicness of the project. That was something which I was actually trying to deal and understand. How could I make the project public also, and at the same time it provides the privacy also. So there was a constant juggle between the both of them, and even in the plans and the entire volumetric, you can see there was a separation between the both of them completely in terms of the physical sense, but there was also some kind of interaction between them. So people could choose according to them, that if they want to interact, they can be a part of it. If they don't want to interact, they can stay secluded from it. So I feel like I was just trying to experiment with this, that how can this model, if implemented, how much will it be successful? Like, just an idea to pitch in, just rather than just building a normal apartment building, but rather like trying to get the people involved in it by interacting with the city. So this question on the apartment actually came because when I was actually doing my internship, I was constantly just making units based on the square feet. There was no thinking about the usage of the spaces by the people, just like getting the unit fit into that particular FSI, which made me to think that this is something that we're building for the people, but the people are only not considered in it. So like it was just like an experiment to like go beyond the basic housing how it's imagined, and like trying to explore what more can be included within that realm. And uh, what like the question regarding like not everybody would like to have such an hustling bustling kind of a corridor between them, and they would not prefer living in that. This was something which was very specific to the site. So the site actually has corridors such that they are used as an extension to the home, and there are small niches which have been created in the corridors which the people already were using as like for like gathering spaces, or for like for the students to study and everything. So getting those idea a little more into the housing, but not completely like having the same thing again, but like a hint of the same living style that they have been living for so many years. So the idea was to like have a hint of their original living pattern that they already had, but like moving forward with the how the city is kind of urbanizing and developing. So that was the main idea. Like and in terms of the regulations, most of the regulations were taken care of in terms of like the fire, and the entrance points, and everything was more or less taken care of to like get a realistic solution which can exist in this society, and not just like an imagination which is just limited to like a project base, like not just like limited to imagination basically.
A quick couple of quick follow-up points, just to if you want to push this idea further, and also respond, keeping all the three views put out. So one thing good about your project is you're trying to show that even within the existing rules, you could try something. But Biju's question is something that you can engage with, is why, if it is possible within this, why it's not happening. So part of it can be answered through the economics of the project. Probably if you had also done a little bit of analysis to show what is the actual usable in terms of a house unit versus what is shared. So you would find that this requires a certain attitudinal shift in the manner that you seek a house, where what has now been swept under super belt is actually, you have to give an analysis, breakup of what is a community space, what is the unit space. So much more than a certain kind of communities that you get in the market. So that's one thing. So you have to sort of establish it a little more, make an argument rather, that the manner in which you project these projects in terms of sale or acceptability is that you're paying for the community, you're paying for the neighborhood. It's not just paying for the unit, which currently is only limited to your common areas and things. But here you're saying, so that is probably the way in which you may have to recast this project from a practical commercial terms. That's one question. Second, something which Veda asked, set me thinking, is also area is whether we are trying to design every nook and corner, or are we showing that through design we are creating opportunities, which is, your illustration is only a demonstration of how it could be used, but there could be multiple possible ways of using that space. And in fact, it is that coming together to use that space is also one of the both transactional and also some kind of bond building. So probably your narration you could slightly alter, in a sense. You say that design creates spaces in the hope that these spaces are actually turned into opportunities, but a whole range of possibilities exist, and what I'm showing is one illustration. So it takes that deterministic quality of your community spaces, but actually show that through design you're creating opportunities. Connected to this, probably, maybe you would be a part of a larger team, but some charter of how to use such spaces within each community. Which is, because the corridor, if it is so common and so public, it's not like everyone whose door is near to X facility has a right over that. So in a sense, so this is also not just a design issue, but it's also in the manner you put your, charter of how to use these spaces. So that is also something that you may, because if you were to end of the day offer them a manual of how to use these public spaces, because of course private spaces are private, but how to use these spaces would also be something connected to how you envisage this space.
Thank you, sir. I think you might want to think over these comments, Anuja.
Yeah.
And to sort of keeping schedule in mind, uh, we might have to combine the next two videos together and then have a common discussion towards the end of that. Mamta, can we play the next two videos together? Saigi and Ishita?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. Thank you so much. The sound is not coming through, Mamta.
I'll just reshare.
Yes, sure.
I did.
Education for all, education by all, a decentralized learning center in an urban context. Through research, the current education system of our country was studied and analyzed, and to tackle its shortcomings, a decentralized, affordable, equal, non mandatory, and state aided learning center was envisioned. The dissertation recognizes schools as the primary source of foundational literacy and numeracy skills, but argues that there must exist other forms of learning on the outside. Over the years, schools have made us believe that self learning is unreliable and irresponsible. All our skills and talents can be measured and ranked. The more one learns in an educational institute, the more successful they will be. School curriculum is thoroughly researched and hence the only way forward. Other reasons to bring about a change include lack of funds and resources, social divisions and disparities, no efforts to improve learning methods, etc. In actuality, one learns through different means which are not confined to the bounds of a school. These include educational objects, skill exchanges, peer matching, and professional educators. As an attempt to improve the learning methods, the research also looked into nature integrated education, collaborative and mutual learning, and technology aided learning and their benefit. Different realms of design were also kept in mind, such as equity, so that everyone has equal access to education, security and pride, so they feel secure in and proud of where they go, creativity and empowerment, so they have certain degree of control over the design of these spaces, and community participation. Lack of funds and resources is one of the major reasons that contribute to the inefficiency of the education system. Thus, the thesis intends to allow the city and its resources to lie at the disposal of its inhabitants where they become potential learning spaces for the people. A network must also be established between the student, teachers, and community for collaborative and mutual learning. The proposal thus is of an experimental learning center, creating networks between these centers, other schools, communities, and potential educational spaces, and a teacher training center. The uses for the same include students, teachers, any civilian who is willing to share their knowledge, local communities, organization, and the government. The city of Mumbai was selected as an experimental prototype to identify a plot for intervention. Its proximity to schools and potential learning spaces was of utmost importance. These potential educational spaces can be categorized as institutional, community, heritage, and nature based spaces. Maps showing the different potential educational spaces within the city were overlaid to come up with possible sites of intervention. The types of programs required in these learning centers were looked into, including classrooms, workshops, AV rooms, nurseries, exhibition halls, etc. To meet the constraints of cost, space, weather, etc., modularity was explored. It also has other benefits such as fast-paced construction, less ecological impact, and modifiable design. The module was imagined as a steel structure of a 6 by 9 grid, which is further experimented with in terms of structural systems and grids, roofing systems, facade systems, and circulation. The classroom module was imagined with a size of 6 by 9 meters, a capacity of 20 people, rotating whiteboard panels with the possibility of forming an outdoor classroom, and skylights for adequate light. The indoor workshop module was imagined with a size of 12 by 9 meters, a capacity of 25 people, and tables that could be pulled down from the facade to form workspaces. The AV room module was imagined with a size of 9 by 18 meters and a capacity of 40 people. It had a see-through metal mesh facade that allows for a visual connect to the outside while still maintaining privacy. The green roof helped in maintaining and regulating temperatures. The exhibition module was imagined with a size of 9 by 18 meters and a capacity of 40 to 50 people. A bamboo facade was provided which allowed for a visual connect to the outside while still maintaining privacy. An outdoor exhibition was provided on the roof with mesh metal panels onto which artwork could be hung and displayed. The outdoor workshop module was imagined with a size of 4.5 by 6 meters and a capacity of 10 people. It was imagined as an open structure which was connected to the outdoors at all times and had features such as climbing facades and a bridge. The library module was imagined with a size of 13.5 by 18 meters and a capacity of 35 people. It had private reading spaces built right into the facade and books as a facade element. The Treehouse Module was imagined with a size of 4.5 by 6 meters and a capacity of 6 people. It had intimate reading spaces and a slide. The Washroom Module was imagined with a size of 6 by 9 meters and a capacity of 9 people. Ducts were provided on 3 sides so as to expose the surfaces and instill curiosity. The modules were then used to design 2 learning centers within the city. We will now be looking at the Sanjay Gandhi National Park site. The map on the left shows the Sanjay Gandhi National Park with the bounds of the park marked in green, the red arrow marking the main entry, and the red ellipse marking the plot of intervention. On the right, a land use map of the same site. Transport map and the topography map for the Sanjay Gandhi National Park site. Potential educational features offered on site. The first image shows the road coming from the main entry and turning towards the more public functions of the park marked in red, while the one in blue leads to the Canary Caves. Plots with minimum foliage were identified to prevent the laying of trees. More public functions were placed close to the existing public functions and they became more private as one moves further down the road. Service blocks were placed close to the road to minimize digging. The modules were tilted off the ground to minimize ecological damage. Perforated walkways, bioswales, and rain gardens were introduced to manage and utilize rainwater, which also acted as buffer between the public and private functions. The most public functions of the park meant for daily walkers and students lie closer to the main entry of the park, while they become more private and student-teacher centric as you go further down the road. For ease of presentation, the ground floor plan was divided into 4 zones. The first one being the most public, meant for daily walkers and kids and teachers coming to site. Starting from the right, you have a cycle parking and shaded seating area, public washrooms, open gym, kiosks, bus parking, outdoor play area, and a washroom. Zone 2, teachers and students getting dropped off at the bus parking proceed towards the outdoor play area or the foyer where they have access to the admin. They are then directed to the AV for an orientation. They might also enjoy other features offered here such as the sounds of the forest. An exhibition space is also introduced for an exhibition or displaying student works that are created on site. Then they might proceed to the library, which is open to all, or pick up a cycle to enjoy the other features of the park. A pathway from the library leads to Zone 3, which has more private functions for intimate learning such as classrooms, indoor workshops, planter beds, etc. Zone 4 marks the most private part of the intervention with functions such as the tree house, outdoor workshops, gathering pavilions, and outdoor activity for slacklining, bonfires, etc. Zone 4 is the only part of the intervention which has G+1 structures, with the tree house having bedrooms on the first floor for kids staying overnight and the outdoor workshop having a bridge connecting the 2 modules. A section cutting through the first 3 zones of the intervention. Zoom in of a section cutting through the first 2 zones of the intervention. Since it's a ground floor structure, one is connected to the outside at all times, both visually and through circulation. Zoom in of a section cutting through zone 3 of the intervention. Part of the intervention, like the wooden bridge seen here, may even be constructed through collaborative learning between the students and the community. Another section cutting through zone 3, highlighting the different ways in which nature could be integrated with learning through biospheres, rain gardens, plantation beds, etc. Section at zone 4 cutting through the outdoor workshop, which was designed in a way that one could see through the building, creating a visual and direct connect with the outside. Another section in zone 4 cutting through the treehouse and space for outdoor activities such as slacklining and woodcutting. Let us now look at the Ambedkar Park site in Powai, which was designed in a similar fashion. On the left, one can see the potential educational features that the site has to offer, while on the right is a massing diagram of the G+1 proposal with functions such as outdoor and indoor workshops, classrooms, nurseries, etc. Section cutting through the nursery also highlighting the features of the park like the Powai Lake, the Mithi River, and the existing biospheres. Section cutting through the indoor and outdoor workshop, the classroom, the exhibition hall, and its relationship with the existing playground and the open activity area. Section cutting through the exhibition hall, the classroom, and the admin area of the intervention and its relationship with the existing school. Wall section cutting through the classroom showing the skylight and the playful swinging and rotating polycarbonate windows. On the left, a wall section cutting through the green roof of the AV, which is used to maintain low temperatures in the AV and provide additional space of plantation. On the right, the foundation of the modules, which is used to reduce ecological impact. On the left, a wall section cutting through the exhibition area, where you can see the bamboo facade and the outdoor exhibition area on the roof, while on the right, green strategies such as biospheres, rain gardens, and perforated walkways incorporated on site. Water management strategies were also incorporated as they can become great ways to teach students how these systems work and how energy can be conserved. The aim of the thesis is to create an education system which is more decentralized so as to make the learning process more participatory and collaborative, more holistic, flexible, empowering, and creative, and accessible by all, thus truly making it education for all, education by all.
Thanks, Malta. You can also have Saivi Shah's video and open it up for the discussion. Mamta, the sound isn't there, but I will play it up.
साउंड नहीं आ रहा है.
The thesis titled Socializing on a Reconstructed Landscape is an attempt at retaining cultural constructs by reinforcing building regulations in the inner city of Mumbai. The trigger for thesis has been the growing homogeneity in the built form, which is in some sense broken by the presence of several communities that exist as vibrant patchworks since the formation of the city and express culture as a physical construct owing to the volumetric regulations of the Bombay Improvement Trust. However, today, the kind of built form taking over these communities is dictated by a building regulation regime that is highly restrictive and eliminates the possibilities for any kind of differentiation. These communities currently have no place in the regulations, and what values get overlooked as a result are exactly the ones that constitute the cultural neighborhoods. And in this context, the thesis is an attempt at breaking this homogeneous loop of development. For this, Each neighborhood in the inner city was classified under 4 broad types to conclude that the focus of the study are communities present in residential neighborhoods based on cultural ethnicity, and one such community is that of the Saraswat Brahmins. Their genesis in the city highlights that they were the pioneers of community housing and stimulated emulation by other communities. The first 3 societies that came up in Gamdevi, Girgaon and Tardev respectively are studied in detail by understanding the physical fabric that has generated certain values through 9 parameters, mainly about the Saraswat households, their community spaces and the life within. What are these 9 parameters can be looked at for the Gamdevi society? They include the role of the urban artifact that played a crucial role in the planning, relationship with the streets and building elements facilitating these, the plan form that has generated certain values in the community, implications of scale on the natural light and ventilation between the buildings, implications on the connection with the ground and the sense of community, ratio of the built to the unbuilt spaces and percentage dedicated to the public realm, community spaces and institutions, both formal and informal, orientation and adjacency of the built form that facilitated visual connections and the daily movement pattern within the society. The same parameters were understood for the Anand Ashram Society at Girgaon and then the Talmaki Wadi Society in Tardev. These were then analyzed as governed by the existing laws of the DCPR 2034, which highlighted the disruptive transformations that can happen, and as an inference, a matrix for each of these 9 parameters was devised to determine what aspect of the community needs to be and what does not need to be retained in the newer development. And the earliest form, Saraswat Brahmin Society at Gamdevi, is chosen as a site for intervention. A mapping of the neighborhood was done to identify the nature of intervention, where the chosen patchwork of the community called for completely rebuilding owing to the dilapidated existing condition, and retrofitting or inserting floors was not possible. So just to summarize the scales of the project, which began with a broader question at the urban level, it zoomed into the micro scale to propose a flexible template which once again extends to a broader perspective applicable across neighborhoods. The guidelines propose that the neighborhood scale informs the architecture in terms of the physical scale and the community boundaries, and secondly, the physical, social and cultural dimensions that constitute the public realm, which include how is it formed, used and monitored. Coming to the scale of the community, plot amalgamation provided for much greater flexibility. FSI has been derived as per the community needs instead of a tool to maximize building, and a community-driven self-redevelopment scheme worked much better, as this is how the societies came up. There are 4 programmatic anchors, which include the garden and cooperative stores as mandatory programs. Existing community structures would be retained, and a newer institutional insert. These 4 components are looked at as anchors around which joint programs are arranged. And a summary of the area shows that a third of the built-up area for housing will be dedicated for amenities, which again goes back to their original planning. At the scale of the building, the second approach, that is individual building blocks of 4 stories coming together, provided greater flexibility. The lowermost floors are public. The first and second layer of building blocks and 2 more floors have been provided as per the requirement. The institution is in the form of a truncated pyramid. Balconies face the main roads, and most shared verandas face inwards, act as extensions to the public programs and provide visual connections without having the need to physically step down. 3 large terraces provide views of the heritage Gamdevi estate area, and existing accesses have been retained. Coming to one building block of 4 stories, entry to all the units happens through the verandas, providing many ancillary views before entering, and this restricts the circulation space only to the center. Structural aspects are integrated with values intrinsic to the community such that they cannot be done away with, like the columns in blue act as altar columns, that is the first thing you see on entering a home, and others direct movement. Cutouts at the ends of corridors symbolize specific embellishments for the community, and there's a possibility of incrementally extending the unit later on. The staircase landings extend to form the spaces for interaction, framed by semicircular arches that also identify the verandas, where the enclosed half acts as a spillover for the house and the other half provides physical access. The same logic follows for the next 2 floors, but the position of the verandas flip and the structure remains intact. This diagram for the building block remains the same, but within it, there are 5 typologies identified based on affordability and need. 64 square meters is the rehabilitation area that needs to be provided, and thereafter the units increase or decrease in area by 16 square meters, starting with the 35 square meters in typology 1 to 128 square meters in typology 5, and this shows the location of each in plan and then in the massing. Verandas constitute up to 20% of the habitable area, and circulation space is 15% and hence not counted in FSI. The first typology consists of the smallest 35 square meter units, which eventually can become 48 square meters. All the living rooms are oriented towards the verandas, and the threshold space in between is flanked by staggered semicircular arches. Only the walls shown in grey are fixed walls. Terracotta hollow block walls are used as secondary storage, and the rest can be flexibly arranged internally. These are the 4 levels of one block belonging to typology 1. Slightly bigger flats of 64 and 80 square meters constitute the second typology, which is slightly recessed to give way to the garden. The third typology is imagined to be a part of the welfare center for the elderly, consisting of individual private self-contained rooms arranged around a community kitchen and dining, and then the corresponding open space on either side. These are looked at as 2 complete self-contained units, and in between there are amenities such as internet access cafes and medical facilities. Typology 4 and 5 consists of the largest units, the difference being in typology 5, the unit is split into 2 levels, resulting in double height volumes inside the homes. Some views of inside the home that extends into the outside, into the double height verandas that encourage living outdoors. All 5 typologies have a common structural layout and can be flexibly arranged in several ways, not constricted by the size of the plot, number of units, or program. The fenestrations are flexible screens made out of 600 mm wide standardized panels in wood, earth, and concrete, which will be procured by recycling the existing building materials, and apart from that, some screens have glass and metal. Each has been divided first by a horizontal member at the railing height and clear story windows above 2.1 meters to bring in more light and ventilation that partially or completely open up. The building skins are derived from the proportions of the existing typical architecture and the Chitara mural paintings, like the semicircular arches whose proportion emphasizes the 4 stories. Triangular inclined parallel surfaces and geometric circles are reflected in other typologies, so even visually the build is somewhat reminiscent of the traditional. On coming together, the skins emphasize the voids created within the building, and the choice of personalized screens reflect individual identities. Coming to the overall floor plans, the 4 programmatic anchors are situated in order to accentuate the existing character of the streets around them. The quieter residential Laburnum Road acts as an extension to the garden, and the busier street on the other side caters to the more public programs. The temple ground is retained as public, and organization around it is similar to that of a typical Hindu temple layout, and the linearity of the commercial edge is broken by allowing people to enter into the site up to a certain point. The footprint of the existing buildings has been retained, and the way each program merges into the other is seen even visually through the architecture. For example, community stores and the display kitchen act as physical outlets for the institution and the traditional Amchik cuisine. The performance space in the multi-purpose area extends to become a deck for the garden, seating for the ground, and prevents vehicular access. The welfare center becomes an indoor extension of the rituals happening in the front. The ramp that takes you up to the public institution forms a backdrop of arches for the temple and acts as a porous divider between the ground and the garden. The water filtration garden is imagined to be an ecological museum where the phytoremediation plants and trees native to Mumbai but reminiscent of Kanara, the native town, will be grown. Anyone taking this route enters the green shed and encounters information related to the ecology. Walls placed at strategic locations emphasize views to specific paths through the trail, which ends in the linear stretch of the plant nursery. These are some views of the garden and the polishing pond standing on the connector, and the linear plant nursery also showing interactions extending beyond the boundary walls. The first floor plan is a continuation of the ground floor to digitally archive and display the community. The housing typologies begin from the second floor onwards, with the lower 2 floors of the public institution caters to visual folk art and performing arts respectively. All the residential floors start from the 3rd floor. The connection from the welfare center to the institution happens via a bridge, which forms a gateway to the temple ground below. The 4th, 5th, and 6th floor plans consist of the first 3 typologies. The verandas start connecting between the buildings depending on the functions they take on. The upper 3 floors of the institution act as an audio and visual library.
The top floor of the first three typologies creates the refuge floor, and this is where the typologies 4 and 5 begin. A second multi-purpose hall and gymnasium have been provided, which are facilities that the residents really wanted. The typology 5 ends here, and a terrace is created at the first level. After 2 floors, the second terrace gets formed, and subsequently, the third terrace is the last level. This is the representation of life on a typical upper floor. Coming to the building elevations, looking towards the temple shows the bridge and the welfare center, connecting the welfare center to the community institution. A little ahead, the multi-purpose hall integrates with the street and the garden. Looking towards this multi-purpose hall, which is a triple height space that has a flat slab construction, is punctured by the institution, which expresses itself in the form of a truncated pyramid, and the building skins of the housing blocks and institutions start connecting as they come together. The larger verandas are overlooked by the staircase extended mid-landings, and the corridors overlook the second veranda. The chhatra is sloped to bring in more light and has these bands which are reminiscent of the older elevation. The size of the balconies will be determined as per the choice of the inhabitants, and also whether they would be made accessible or not, or just be used as planter beds is left as a choice. These are on the opposite side looking towards the garden, showing the double height volumes belonging to typology 5. And the last set is as seen from the main road, where 3 buildings are perceived similar to the older urban grain, and entries are created between buildings. Surplus treated water can be sold to the neighboring buildings. Solar panels contribute to 55% energy consumption and allow for the hydroponic system to happen on the building terraces. Community proverbs are engraved on the walls for anybody to see. The Chitara mural paintings executed locally are displayed on the external surfaces, usually in natural terracotta paints, which also impart the colors to the building blocks. So just to conclude, their way of life and cultural values, even though started off with cultural ethnicity, has developed and grown stronger due to years of living together. The architecture of these communities and the values that binds them not only facilitates their unique way of living, but identifies them while still responding to the urban aspirations of living in a city. Thank you.
Thanks. Mamta, you can take your time and try to unmute the 2 students.
Yes, Karan, you can go ahead.
Okay, sure. So, Saini and Ishita, you can turn on your cameras whenever it's activated. Okay. So, I mean, due to scheduling reasons, we had to sort of club the 2 together. So, if the panelists want to, if the panelists want to either talk about a specific project or share their thoughts on the 2 projects combined, we can do that as well. So, Srivatsan sir, can we start with you again, if that works?
Oh yeah, yeah. You know, both projects are fairly well worked out in to the take the questions and try to find solutions across multiple scales of their concern, and the drawings were really impressive. So the level of engagement is also substantial. So it's not just either getting quickly to looking at small aspects of design or just stop with some meta ideas. So this is all consistent, which is a good thing to see, because you know how a solution to a problem exists at multiple scales, multiple levels, and you keep showing not only your graphs but also trying to offer a solution in the best of your capacities. So both the projects do that, and I quite like, and also I'm impressed with the quality of the drawings themselves at the end of the day. So both are good, and also that's one of the reasons why they're there. And actually, all the 3 were put together. So though we took the first one separately, all the 3 have certain things in common. The first thing that really strikes me in these two projects and as well as the other is you don't have to always think that a new possibility can happen only when everything changes, unless there is some kind of a revolution or something like that. So in a current situation, one cannot do anything. Is a point that this thing, though they have not explicitly stated, this is what I see, that how you can still improve things, and which often is probably the ground condition, and how. So our responsibility of it possibly as a designer is to show those possibilities. Even though if ground conditions dramatically change, then you will find something else. But nevertheless, till something like that happens, we keep pushing. And that's what both of them show. I also like the approaches, again, in terms of looking at them as as some sense of a product. To me, the product is not really a bad word. Some make it out to be. So it's not product, it's product and systems. So it's not just one unit. You're looking at not only just an amassing of the units to make a project, but also look at, which in this case is not so much in terms of structure or services, etc., but more in terms of what collectively, when they are put together, how do you address the site? How do you address the community? How do you address the site? Even though you're actually, in a sense, modularly thinking, in small modules, but you don't lose sight of both the design of the modules and the of its coming together at site. So those are all really positive things about these two projects. Only thing I wish is in the case of the education units, one could possibly demonstrate a little further of how these units, both in its individual design, sort of has the capacity to be flexible in multiple site conditions. See, this is the what will be the difference between such an approach now and a sort of an approach of this about 40, 50 years ago, standardization, multiplication, reproduction, which was all through an industrialized process, was always there. But we are coming back to it. So what is the difference between doing things now and then is the key question. So I assume probably the ability to customize a modular unit is far more possible and feasible now. And actually, when we come to showing how in a particular site you're laying them out, is to again go back to the unit and modular design and show the robustness of that modular unit. So how, as a design, as a product, that it is able to adjust to these conditions. And it gives you all those sort of feasibilities. And I think the social contribution and also partly an economic contribution of this approach lies in how you can upgrade some of these social infrastructure facilities in areas where you can't do it, or you have to do it quickly, or in a transit camp, or because though it's called transit camps, a lot of people end up living for years and so on, or probably in a relatively an area where building skills are not available. So in a sense, then the robustness of the design is also in the manner in which it could be put together and maintained in a certain way, and how even with, I'm not saying in very critical conditions, but even in challenging infrastructure, how it can sustain itself, the unit, power, sanitation, etc. It's not just a space, because I don't see it as something only used, because the significance of this approach lies in its ability to provide facilities in challenging conditions. So how will it adapt to those things is also part of the modular design. And hence, I thought probably your choice of those two sites could be two dramatic sites of two varying levels of infrastructure and social infrastructure. And that would possibly be in a very good demonstration, rather than picking it in Bombay and very similar places. In the other housing project, some of the comments are again connected to the previous ones. As I told in the beginning, that just to show that it's possible, within the given systems of production of units, whether we like it or not. That's the condition. And architects, though, may want to think they can change the conditions of the economics and the politics of production, often don't have those possibilities. So how best can you possibly work and create those conditions is what you're trying to do, which is good. And you acknowledge some of the ground conditions of how communities come together and how by varying the typologies that you're able to sort of achieve these things. But I don't want to repeat myself. Probably I'll just stop here and allow others to also say about some of the comments about what was mentioned in the last project about how you resolve typologies and common facilities, questions of privacy and things like safety and other things. But of course, you may say that strength of your project lies in demonstrating how you can tweak and work with the rules. But we have to comprehensively see. I'll stop here and probably wait a bit.
Yeah, so I think what Sri talked about, the fact that both these projects and even the earlier projects, and to some extent all the 8 shortlisted projects, one could look at them and kind of think of it extremely pragmatically. I think that was something that came out from this whole process, is that they are all working in some sense with the limits. They are working and addressing the sort of the existing issues. They are sort of embracing them. And when you start to do that, the only comment that I want to make is that it also comes with the response. Your solutions are not necessarily with the design, and I think it's important to understand that larger meaning of each of the projects that you take up, especially when you start to touch upon issues, like, for example, Ishida's project. And these are, a lot of the comments that Sri Watson mentioned, I completely concur. But, when you look at Ishida's projects, I thought, do you need to build so much? Like, for example, when you engage with an heritage site, can you look to reappropriate the spaces that already exist there? And is that the sort of the better solution to engage people with those buildings or with those spaces in a way that it becomes much more meaningful? Because see, a lot of these has to become sort of way of living. If it has to be successful, even for us to kind of preserve a building, we need to adapt that building to kind of the sort of the programmatically, etc., to the changing times that we live in, and that is when it becomes meaningful and sustainable. So, do you really need to build more, or is it more meaningful to really kind of engage with some of these heritage buildings, etc., and try and programmatically rework so that you stay still on the issues, and you are trying to kind of find that, and through that you are also adding more layers to that project, because design is not necessarily the solution, and that's even true with Saivi's project, and I felt, it's a wonderful project. We really liked it, the fact that, it was working with extreme, existing conditions, existing limits, and try and find solutions with that. But as I was listening to you, I felt, where is the process? When you talk about self-development, can you really ignore the process? It became, I just felt it became too much about you and your design, as opposed to what is, I know at an academic level, it is different because you don't necessarily engage with that community at large. But it's also probably when you start to talk about self-development, you need to start to address that in your projects and lay out a process through which you kind of do. How do you do a self-development project? Because you may be surprised when you start to engage with this community, especially in Bombay. Most of them say that I don't want this community spaces. Give me more square footages. So I think, and self-development, the moment you start to talk about self-development, that negotiated construct comes into the being, and you can't ignore that. And I think your design is a result of that negotiations. And I think while you may not be able to come up with a conclusive solution at a design project, you can definitely lay out a process through which one needs to engage with that, and it is not a real estate project. Of course, it is construction, etc., but you're working with the community. You need to kind of listen to them. You need to lay out a process through which you kind of develop. And that is extremely key for that project. You can't ignore that and come up with design solutions without talking about it. And I think that these are the issues that one, especially when you start to take up topics like this, you can't ignore that, and you can't just put the designer's hat and try and find solutions the way you see it. And I think these are some of the issues that you need to kind of think of it. Yeah, Veda.
Yeah, I think even my thoughts are kind of similar to what Biju says, because like with the school project, the first thing that comes to mind is, when we think of education for all and neighborhood schools and stuff, I actually wonder, or even the state of government schools, I actually wonder how much of the problem is to do with infrastructure. Because there is material already, like even in our MFA, for instance, there is a course where we, because we were located in a rural part of Uttar Pradesh, there was a course where we were to go into these neighborhoods and discover the local histories around the space that we were in, because there isn't really a record of these histories, because the history that we get is mostly mainstream histories, So what these local histories, these local heritage sites, local monuments are, and kind of engage with the villages around and get a sense of that history through those interactions, So it's not really material. So there's already material in any place. There's a story or a history to any kind of city, area. Everything has a history. So I feel like the interventions, like, of course, ideally speaking, an infrastructure provides, the physical architectural infrastructure provides something, and through that learning happens. But I feel like a lot of the problems in the existing model is to do with curriculum and the education system itself. So then even just providing a building, I don't know how much it will do in terms of, this is maybe sound too cynical, but it's like the state of things the state of things at this point is sort of, it kind of makes you quite, because a lot of the time what happens is these things just become hollow shells. They don't get used in the way that they're supposed to, So it shouldn't be like a redundant, something that's so complex that it doesn't get absorbed into the existing curriculum. So there needs to be a kind of tweaking that is in keeping with, even like you'd have to think through curriculum building and speak to people who are making these curriculums in order to really come up with, viable solutions. Those are my thoughts mainly to do with your project. And with SIVs, there is nothing, no comment that I can think of particularly, but I really enjoyed how thorough it was and how well thought out the whole thing was. And it sort of took into account, went into real detail, and the whole, yours was the micro-macro thing, was it? Yeah, so I sort of really enjoyed those various levels, and that engagement was nice. But again, I'd agree with what Biju says about, being too much of a, designer. I'm going to design and I'm going to do, the same, I agree there. So you can sort of have a little bit of a hands-off kind of thing as well, hands-on and hands-off, a balance between both. So yeah, not try to kind of, again, be too deterministic and expect a particular outcome. So yeah.
Would the students like to quickly respond, or we can move to
I'd
section?
like to respond. Thank you so much, everyone, for the comments. Specifically, I would like to just clarify the points that Mr. Biju had raised. Just talking about clarifying the kind of process that was followed and looking at the self-redevelopment scheme throughout, it was not, it was sort of firstly understanding the attitude that the community had towards rebuilding, towards self-redevelopment was very important, what they wanted. And that was one of the most important criteria of going ahead with this community, not only because they have a very strong presence in almost every neighborhood, but their attitude is such that they are a community who are very close-knit, and their relationships have been consolidated over several years of living together. And these are some relationships that they want to hold on in the future. And that is the reason they are not going for the redevelopment even now. It's not that the redevelopment is not crucial. It is because the existing buildings are quite dilapidated in condition right now. And secondly, even the plan form and the planning aspects have become sort of redundant and outdated. Some aspects, they're not able to cater to the growing population. So there are a lot of issues which call for completely rebuilding, but the thesis tries to make a case that completely rebuilding does not necessarily mean a complete revamp of the space in some sense. It is about how these communities can now exist in the urban changing world around them and still cater to the urban aspirations, but hone on to the culture that makes these communities very distinct. Talking about self-redevelopment, this is actually how the societies have come up in the first place, where they were sort of the pioneers of initiating community housing in the city. And the planning community architects and planners sort of formulated their own set of guidelines, which also empower these communities from back then. So this has been happening since the time they came up, and then studying like the other models of redevelopment right now, like the standard privatized sort of a scheme where there's a top-down approach by a developer. All of these incentives are very heavily weighted towards the developer and in favor of them in terms of the monetary compensation or the extra FSI and things like that. What incentives that the community gets is very, very marginal or less. Hence, going ahead with a scheme where they are very much involved in every sort of process, right from the beginning to the completion stage, was very important. And for doing this, several interactions were carried out with the community members physically, not only in Gamdevi, but in different parts, like the 3 societies that I mentioned in different areas. Physical discussions were done with the community as to what they want, what aspects are relevant, what are not relevant, not only through observations, but also through surveys and interaction. And at the end, even to work out the scheme and to make it a feasible scheme, a feasibility report was worked out, where sort of the cost of construction was compensated at the end by providing the extra units and smaller things like renting out the commercial spaces or harvesting the water and selling it out to the neighboring buildings, things like that would make it a complete 100% profitable scheme for them, such that they go ahead with this kind of a proposal. So it was actually completely done as per governed by the inhabitants for themselves, and it is specific to the Saraswat Brahmin community itself. I agree, different approaches would be required for different sort of communities based on culture, economic, the geographic location, and things like that. But this one very specifically demonstrates a case where a complete rebuilding is required, and it is a community-based residential neighborhood based on cultural ethnicity. So it is a flexible template in terms of making it applicable to this community located in different parts of the neighborhood, but it is very much specific to this community. And different approaches would be required for different communities because of the kind of diversity and plurality that exists in the inner city at present.
Right.
That was my point.
Now that's wonderful. I think some of these things didn't come through very clearly, maybe in the presentation, because it's important.
The lack
to
of time actually was something I was struggling with. Footing.
No, but your project is about that. I mean, that's what I mean. Frankly, if you ask me, I don't care how much detail you went into the design. I mean, just don't tell your teachers that. But but it's really that process which kind of drives it, and establishing that process is very important, and having it come through in your presentation is also very critical, because like you said, the next project will be completely different, but the process may be similar, but your answer may be completely different depending on who occupies that space, what kind of spaces exist, etc.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
I would also like to address the jurors with respect to the comments that were made. Firstly, thank you for your time and energy to go through all our presentations. My first comment is in response to the first 2 jurors regarding the sites that were chosen. I understand that the 2 sites that were chosen were quite similar in that fashion. And I didn't really explore as much as I could have in terms of how each module starts changing according to the site. Honestly, that was because of lack of times and permissions during the COVID era. I initially even thought of intervening in a mill land in Baikala, but because of reasons I couldn't do so. Like the intent was to find these sort of educational landscapes all across the city. As I mentioned, I was talking about the heritage, the institutional, the community, the open spaces. So the idea at large is to actually access these educational landscapes and integrate them in the in the school learning and not make it a part of the school. It's an outside entity that exists which aids with the learning, and that was the entire idea of the project. Given more time, I would definitely would have liked to explore these other sites and what they have to offer and how the module sort of changes, which is why I actually went ahead and actually made a matrix of how these different skins and structural systems could possibly be adapted to tweak it a little bit here and there, and according to the participation of the people who are actually going to be using it, like the students, the teachers, even the local community, which is the basic larger idea. And that was the intent. And coming to Veda's comments about how it's not only about the
Ishita, sorry. In the best interest of time, you have to be very brief now.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So, in Veda, you brought up the fact that infrastructure may not be the core issue, and the core issue is the curriculum and the policies that are actually governing all this, which is why my project was not ever called a school. It was always a learning center that falls outside the realm of the current boards and the current curriculum. So it's not even a mandatory thing. Anyone and everyone, like the users that I mentioned, could be schools, could be people coming from the local community, could be a person who just wants to share their ideas. Like a lot of, despite the fact that we are getting educated in a school, there exists a number of tuition classes, and clearly there's some sort of lacking for that. I'm just giving a sort of infrastructure for these kind of things to happen while simultaneously using the city's resources to aid to the learning process. So, but for example, I can't just expect an abandoned mill to be used in a certain way. I can't create a formal space within the existing dilapidated maybe structure that could be used for the learning. I can help, maybe I can maybe take parts of it and inculcate it within the learning process, but I can't use the current existing infrastructure there. So the idea was to integrate these sort of modules which could give more freedom and creativity to the users and the people who are actually going to be coming together to use the space. That was the idea. It was never to build another school, because that will never solve the problem. Because I, as a student, do not even have access to policymakers, or like I don't even have a say. So I was just trying to act outside that entire realm and give back to the people. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Rishita and Saimi. With this, we have come to the end of session 1. I would like Ankush to take over from this point onwards and begin with session 2. Thanks a lot, Ankush. Over to you.
Thanks, Karan. The next group of theses by Asmita Patnaik and Zai Naik deal with the public realm and urban commons. They imagine a reuse of what's usually considered leftover or interstitial spaces. Both projects intervene in the context at multiple scales: the scale of the urban, the local, and that of the body itself. And they reimagine the experience of the public realm at each scale. The first project that we'll be looking at is Asmita Patnaik's project. The thesis is titled Constructing Eudaimonia, Generating Positive Experiences in the Everyday. Set in Mumbai, the thesis, and I'm directly quoting from her abstract now, set in Mumbai, the thesis is an exploration of experience to a spatial setting, where urban environment is understood as an experience which has an emotional stimulus to understand what is necessary to facilitate urban happiness and well-being within the work-life paradigm in the socially incoherent city life. Lower Parel, a mixed-use precinct, was chosen as the intervention site due to its sporadic nature of urban growth, which makes the experience of even a 10-minute walk in the precinct a stressful one. The project lies in its transitional interface, exploring ways to amplify and alleviate issues of stress and social isolation. I'll request Mamta to share the presentation.
Hi, I'm Asmita, and I'll be talking about my title, Constructing Eudaimonia,
generating positive experiences within the everyday, which looks at the possibilities of creating positive well-being through urban experiences. Today, modern city development and urban lifestyle provokes a state of psychological discomfort. Building onto urban stress and anxiety, especially within the metros, which needs to be mitigated. Thus, through my thesis, I wish to extend the conversation to bring forth a paradigm shift in the way we look at our cities, to consciously focus on rebuilding the fabric, to bring subjective well-being and eudaimonia or urban happiness as a locus of planning and design. This exploration of experience to a spatial setting is broached at two scales, largely the urban and the human experience of the environment. Through a spatial parameter for well-being, developed by studying varied metrics and reports that facilitate an interdependency between happiness and space, the importance of creating pro-social spaces in the construction of joy came through. The possibility of improving well-being lies in creating desirable, varied opportunities to savor a pause and restore balance in the daily routines. In this narrative of the daily encounters, the image of Mumbai remains altered. The life in the city is imagined as a series of polyrhythms and speeds. There are seemingly limitless facets of identity that shapes one's experience in the city, but a person's movement often becomes very controlled within the work-life paradigm, making it the most critical node to create a third space which encapsulates joy. For creating a eudaimonic impact, it was integral to identify a site of immense urban stress become a pressure point to be released. From the analysis at the urban scale and the human scale, CVDs along the key transit were found to be points of critical urban stress, making it the focus area of the study. As a response, it was analyzed as a space for release to create a larger impact on the city. This architectural imagination could be a part of the larger Happy City Scheme 2030, which focuses on the need for more inclusive open spaces in Mumbai as a generator for well-being. Lower Parel was chosen as the eventual site, which, due to its sporadic nature of urban growth, made the experience of even a 10-minute walk in the precinct a stressful one, with overflooding streets contrasting its gated offices. Further, its urban model is similar to several others in the precinct, making an intervention here a potential example of how we could, through understanding environments, improve well-being in the city. As the main anchor to the paradigm, the experience of moving through Lower Parel station was also understood, where the urban stress was heightened due to congested bottlenecks. The intent was to alleviate this experience and trigger a positive balance for the precinct and the city at large. As a pursuit of urban happiness can only be successful through a scalar effect, the architectural strategy was that of a ripple, assisted by meta-level policies. Here, as an extension to the station and the yard, the areas of central Mumbai were pursued under a larger imagination for the city, where it carries possibility of public space reconversion in one of the most critical regions of Mumbai's morphology. At the scale of the precinct master plan, strategies were created by reorganizing its mobility patterns and pause point along its most critical transit routes, where, as an extension of this framework, the station was explored as an everyday infrastructure that would promote welcoming environment and experiences, uniting different uses to create moments of pause and interaction, almost like a big public park that becomes a transitional interface as we move towards a platform, where the intent was to create architecture that facilitates opportunities of respite, pro-social interaction, and opportunities to linger. By designing congenial moments of pause and interaction, which allow people to take charge of their experience, the station transition was curated as a pause between the live and the work. Developed over existing circulatory systems to create varied opportunities of movements and speed, with the helical anchoring the street edge on one end and the yard explored as a space of slow meander on the other, the station creates three sensorial landscape of a semi-private to a public nature, where the wilderness of the rail yard becomes an open space for the precinct with dire need of inclusive public spaces. The core of the station annex becomes a relief space for commuters as well as for the locals, and the forecourt, which is the most public space, acts as the interface between the street and the railway station. A network of pause points is created within them, allowing the movement possibilities to shape the architecture, with the ground opening up for the precinct as a large park, and the thoroughfare becoming the distinct edge between the street and the plaza, such that the intervention becomes a public space to give back to the city. The intent was to create the station interface as a social landscape with the varied trails leading to the eventual station, connected with a three-sensorial landscape which curated smaller moments of joy. In this interface, speed settings and functions were integrated, these not only as per the needs of the area, but keeping the larger intent of flexibility of movement and engagement in mind. This is the ground floor plan. Each route will be explained in detail in the further slides. The sunken quick route. Since the quick to and fro from the station is imagined as a frequented commute, its width is the largest. Aided by smaller pause points, such as a takeaway cafe or an ATM kiosk, where the idea of pause aids one as they charge towards the station, as opportunities of joy in the haste. With the straight-arrowed road being sunk to be removed from the rest of the engagements, the pedestrian route extends out to the trail, with the helical and the ticket counter becoming the marker. The second route is the ground-paced route. Unlike the direct route, it has a sense of meander and secondary anchors, a space for the commuters as well as the locals in the precinct. It anchors itself not just to the station, but the transitional building, which provides commute-assisted programs such as workshop spaces, galleries, and gyms for the local residents. The programs within the block are shifted to the peripheries to create unhurdled movement for the transit users within this landscape. The transitional block connects the various interlacing routes, allowing multiple choices to move out of the complex while providing spaces of pause, which are built as well as unbuilt in nature, anchored to the three courts. It has smaller moments of pleasure, such as how the station concourse opens up to the holding pond and a courtyard where the access to blue-green spaces creates a calming effect in the tidal wave of transit. The ground floor is imagined to be porous in light, assisted with tree columns to create an ease of movement, allowing the park to radiate through the scheme, forming an urban oasis, where the upper floors, which connect to the pedestrian bridges, act as a floating block with a similar idea of meander. The third route is the elevated quick route, which connects the various footover bridges to the main block and the helical for fast movement to both the platforms, while also facilitating opportunities of work, which is closer and more connected to the transit, with programs consciously created to increase the efficiency and comfort of the movement. The commute trail has smaller meanders and softer moments in the daily hustle, with the footover bridges curated as an eventful elevated promenade, which expands to create release while you move through the platform, while also opening up to a lot of smaller open spaces. The project has been consciously reworked with the consideration of the surroundings and the user's psychological health, bringing us to the last route, the route of meander, which, unlike the key commuter routes, is a route curated for leisure, as a place to de-stress in the evenings on your way home, or maybe on a lazy Sunday to rejuvenate oneself. Set within the beautiful vegetation of the existing rail yard, the route is seemingly a curation of private moments in a public space, a conscious attempt to slow down and linger, where the more public programs become the station interface, and as one moves further away, the experience becomes more sensorial and guarded. The route moves along the existing placement of trees, running alongside the disused railway tracks. The sections of the cafe is a reflection of this walk in the wilderness, creating a healing environment against this urban stress. Through the project, the idea of eudaimonia is explored in the idea of having opportunities developed from the parameters of well-being. The proposed infrastructure serves as a platform to help reimagine daily routines and regain the right of how one wishes to engage with the civic infrastructure. It is an investment for the inhabitants to improve their well-being, health, and overall productivity in their daily lives. Because, in the end, what we experience is what really matters. The pandemic today has shown the need for integrating well-being in our cities, the impact our environment has on our daily experiences. So, the thesis wishes to trigger an inquiry in how do we design for human connection, if what we experience is a function of how we live. Thank you.
Thanks, Mamta. Zai Naik's thesis, which is titled River in the City, Reviving the Urban River's Edge and Making it an Urban Calm. It intends to examine the changing socio-ecological relationships between the land, the river, and the different communities across time. It attempts to analyze and tell the story of an urban river through the lens of local collective histories and ecologies with juxtapositions of policies, as well as a political imagination of the landscape by the state. Methodologically, it examines the chronological evolution of the Dahisar River landscape with layers of socio-cultural significance and its ecology to build a narrative. The thesis aims to reshape the perception of urban rivers and evoke considerations of socio-ecological relationships in the designing of urban landscapes and making it an urban common by community stewardship and through systemic interventions conserving its ecology. I'll request Mamta to play the next video.
Hello everyone, I am Zain Naik and my thesis is River in the City, reviving the urban river's edge, making it an urban common again. The presentation today will be discussed in three parts: the argument, the master plan and strategy, and finally the design intervention and its detailing. The thesis explores the changing relationship with the natural ecosystem in an urban context. The case of Dahisar River, a river in the northern suburb of Mumbai, and the landscape around it. The thesis questions the possibility of rethinking the city on the basis of the commons and readdressing how planning and designing can be sensitive towards the urban landscape and its relationship with the people. Thus, a need for systemic approach which provides a holistic understanding of the landscape through the tangible lens of topography, the nature, the river catchment, the built form, and the community inhabiting the landscape. Mapping the landscape through these lenses and the history of human intervention through four time periods. Thus, a story of the landscape can be painted with the neoliberal urbanization dictating the main narrative.
Mamta, we've lost audio on the video.
Of different stakeholders. The matrix can be further drawn, inferring from the past usage, the present condition, and to speculate the future of the landscape and its association with the people, based on the trends of rampant urbanization and the developmentalist approach of the state. In order to revive the living heritage of the river, with a people and ecologic centric approach for the river's stewardship, a systemic approach with the medium of care, knowledge, and agency is asserted. Themes of revival of the indigenous programs, the restoration of the river's heritage, responding to the on-site programs, and ecological restoration of the landscape. The Urban River Heritage Trail is proposed as a larger program which anchors other interventions covering multiple pause points having socio-cultural and historical significance, exploring various biodiversity spots as well. The strategy plan shows the nature. The ecological revival of the river's edge is envisioned to be classified into immediate goals, short term goals, and long term goals. The strategies have a neighborhood level and a larger city level intervention to pull in people and make new spaces of commony. Each pause point is associated with occupational, recreational, and ecological commons. The strategy uses the river as a central spine and creating multiple public spaces around it, along with cycling and walking tracks. Along with other programs, the proposal of River Heritage Center is to archive and exhibit the stories and celebrating the collective histories. To reclaim the ecological commons by naturally treating the water of the river through various landscape strategies like having reed beds, afforestation programs, layered wetlands, etc. Vegetation strategies mainly look for adding vegetation for holding the soil and creating a natural riparian edge along with planting native species all along the river's edge, which are important in ecology for their role in soil conservation and the impact on the habitat biodiversity. The part of the land in the master plan near the Mandapeshwar caves, which becomes a pause point, is detailed out as an architectural intervention. The site has the Mandapeshwar caves, St. Francis Church complex, which are structures of historical importance. As you move towards the river, there is a dense housing settlement on a gradual terrain slope. The major of the site is an open ground, which is gated and it lacks accessibility to all. In order to curate the landscape, strategy is based on to create a riparian edge of the mixed hydrophilic trees and shrubs, making sure that the edges are flood resilient, along with indigenous trees which are planted. The northern part has the urban farms with fruiting trees. The rest of the landscape is a recreational one with sensory garden, orchards, public gardens, playing areas, and amenities edge. The natural drainage patterns are curated to create a subsurface water body or to take care of the groundwater by creating contour trenches and wetlands. The program of the stretch is derived from the river stewardship program with the aim of reviving the commons.
I can't hear.
With the aim of reviving the belt of amenities, thus becomes a thoroughfare between the settlement and the river's landscape. The highlighted links are the extension of the pedestrian pathways and other open spaces in the settlements, which manifest into cuts in the mass of the building, also activating the edge, which was initially unused. The idea of the central street runs through the structure and makes the entire ground floor accessible to the public. The people's experience through the landscape is explored through the drawing, showing different kind of user groups living and feeling the landscape. The new landscape makes space for it all. The ground floor plan showing the entire building's edge. The following presentation will be explained in three major parts, starting with the River Heritage Center, the community block, and the utilities. The River Heritage Center is the first structure you encounter while entering the site from the river's edge. The building is inward looking with sunken central courts. This connecting courtyards have archival and exhibition space around it. The structure opens in a big open space which is pivoted on the corner and which becomes a spill out from the settlement's edge. The courtyards are permeable and which are held together by stone retaining walls. The light overhung bamboo roof creates semi-open covered spaces for gathering. Spaces for gathering. Overhung bamboo roof creates semi-open covered spaces for gathering. Of people from different communities of the neighborhood with programs like vocational training center, a senior citizens group, a rentable multipurpose hall, common indoor study area. The central courtyard becomes one of the main points of penetration from the settlement's edge into the building and has programs like rentable book library, a public toilet, and children's creche. The southern edge has semi-covered spaces which facilitate outdoor gathering and reading spaces which overlook the landscape. The upper floor directly connects to the settlement's edge through a bridge which brings you to the Rozgar Training Center. Through a bridge which brings you to the Rozgar Training Center. Training Center is such that it's an open structure with an overhung roof making the building an approachable one. Corrugated bamboo roofing sheets with epoxy coating are used for roofing with a cage of purlins supporting it on a truss of horizontal and vertical rafter members. The building's varied response to the landscape edge is seen through outdoor spaces. One farm is sold here. The markets are enveloped around a series of courtyards which become spillouts of these busy spaces. The eastern edge has a community kitchen, a pantry, and an adjoining eatery which opens out into the landscape. And the landscape and the hawkers market. Opens into the vista of the river and the landscape, thus becoming a space of learning, reading, gathering, and more. The central courtyard showing the stairs coming down from the settlement's edge. The commons market, which more often than less becomes a space for meeting and socializing. The flood. It shifts the concern over the need for beautification projects to bring in monumentality and commerce to the state. It doesn't look for the need to replace and rehabilitate. It recognizes the commons belonging to all. Thank you.
Thanks, Mamta. I'll now request the panelists to turn on their cameras and respond to the project. I'd also like to ask the students to turn on their camera and respond very briefly, of course. Bichu, would you like to go first?
Yeah, so again, wonderful work. Quite lovely drawings. Really enjoyed going through these projects. Asmita's, your drawings were quite compelling. Good clarity, etc., etc. With regard to your project, I mean, I wish there's a little more study on the sort of the scale of the project. Understanding what is the role of a third space, especially within in Bombay, nothing is a neighborhood, everything is a city. But even within that, within that neighborhood, especially when you take spaces like railway stations, which are really sort of gateways into the neighborhood, one needs to kind of think of the scale of intervention. And I think, for us, infrastructure is these massive buildings. And then when we talk about third space, one need to really challenge that and see what makes it. See, the role of a third space is, of course, it's a breathing space, it's a lung space, but it also creates a sense of place, sense of identity for you, especially when you are living in that neighborhood. And so it's very critical to understand the scale of the intervention and how inclusive that space that you create is, in the sense that one needs to be comfortable to occupy that space within a scale of the neighborhood. So I think it's very important to kind of study these things when you start to kind of talk about getting a disturbance. Hello. Yeah. So it's very important to kind of, look at that scale. What is the role of these, large infrastructures like walkways, etc., which kind of ties in? Where is the role of the ground in creating that third space? How do you kind of make it? Because the ground is the most democratic of spaces, and I think it's the most inclusive of spaces. And you really need to kind of establish an attitude towards the ground, even when you go contrary to that. And I think that you need to address that. I think that so the idea of ground needs to be kind of emphasized more, and really look at that scale. And that's where I felt you could have really, you brought in a lot of programs. One needs to also think of, whether one needs all those programs, because the real role of third space in a neighborhood level is to kind of also to create that sense of identity, which I sort of mentioned that. And so that I thought one could look at a bit more deeply and kind of analyze it and study that, the idea of soft city, the idea of scale, etc., needs to be looked at, because that's the role at a neighborhood level. The second project, G, that neighborhood communities. So the second project, my real issue, again, a wonderful effort, a lot of work has gone in, but I also felt that there is a lack of integration or the study of the neighborhoods, in the larger vicinity, because you can't create a commons with just destination activities. People has to take ownership of that space. And I think if we have to really revitalize our rivers, we need to really study the neighborhoods around this rivers, and give that ownership of those rivers to the neighborhoods around it. And that is where that's the real ownership comes in, and I think it has to become an extension of the life of the people who live around that neighborhood. And I felt that that deeper study of neighborhood was missing, connectivities, programs, what happens within those neighborhoods, which then one can link together. Because when a river hits a neighborhood, it's a neighborhood space. It's the same way Lower Parel station hits a Lower Parel station. It kind of has to bring down its scale and become more intimate and relate to that scale. So every infrastructure like this have those multiple scales, and you need to understand at what scale at which you are intervening. A train station on a VT station will have a completely different relationship to one in Lower Parel. And that scale needs to be understood. And hence, when you start to find solutions to these issues, you need to, ultimately you need to understand that cities are about people, and you need to figure out a way to kind of give ownership to the people who live in the city to these infrastructure at different scales. And I think that I felt was completely missing in your studies and in your design solution, a larger discussion of the larger neighborhood. So we can't solve the problems of a city by just thinking within our side. It's no different from you doing an architecture project within a compound wall. There are boundaries that one needs to break when you start to kind of reimagine that spaces. Because at the end of the day, cities are about shared spaces. And so one needs to kind of look at and start to blur. The idea of threshold becomes very critical in cities. And at what is that blurred relationship to those different scales? And I think that is very critical to understand. And I felt that the project could have benefited more from studying the neighborhoods around it. So, but other than that, both the projects are quite wonderful. It talked about issues which are very critical. I think needs attention, etc. So, thanks. Yeah, Vedasri, I'm done.
Yeah. I think as we move along, I feel like the comments would be more sort of generic and kind of similar also, because some projects have what another doesn't. So it's almost like either this is well developed and the other part is sort of overlooked, in each of the things. So I wouldn't even want to really repeat myself too much. So treat these also as sort of generic comments to the larger group, But with the river project, what stood out for me was that, in a lot of the entries, what I find is the way this thing of nature is approached is sort of as if something very deliberately needs to be done with it in order for it to be enjoyed, rather than to let it do its thing and integrate. So what I enjoyed about this one was that it sort of considers the ecological bit more thoroughly than some of the others, where when nature's talked about is sort of objectified, put in a box and let us look at it from a distance kind of thing. So I really enjoyed the integration, especially the panels for me were really exciting because the river was sort of central through it all. So, but while it does that, what it ends up neglecting is this community commons aspect, So that's what I meant. Treat these comments as, there should be some way to try and be able to, work in a way or think in a way that does both simultaneously. Shouldn't sort of get so sort of caught up on what the aim is and then just kind of stick with that and resolve that, You have to, your mic is muted. Anyway, you'll have to figure out, find a way to sort of do both simultaneously. And with Asmita's, I really enjoyed, I think what worked for me was the simplicity in a sense and the approach, where it's coming from. But at the same time, I think it as a vision, it sort of risks being a little naive in terms of just interpreting what's missing as joy or happiness, because I think joy and happiness is far more complex than, how you describe it. So it's again, I think my issue, not really issue, but my comments are more to do with in conceiving of the idea, it being so plain and happy, like a smiley face. It's not just that, So yeah, I think broadly speaking, these were my thoughts with regards to both. But I really like again, I thought that in its simplicity, it sort of resolves some key, or touches upon some key ideas and issues, which was what was impressive to me. So okay. I'm done.
The reason for picking these two projects amongst other projects that also address the issue of urban space was that the level of engagement, because that's something that I think all the three of us were looking across all the entries. So, and all the entries sort of could be clubbed, 4 or 5 each or more on the themes they were addressing. And you too were addressing of creating urban space. And amongst the projects that did that, how you engaged it, your approach, your design, your drawings were really stood out. And other points I already mentioned. I think in one way both are, an inversion of the other. So here the station is navally built, and you try to bring an open space to make it urban commons. In the riverside, it's basically an open space, and you're building in activity in order to reinforce its public nature of it. And that's one of the reasons why both are also clubbed to look at two ways of doing this, reinforcing the urbanness or the publicness of the project. Insofar as the station is concerned, I agree there is a shortage of open space, and how do you increase the open space, etc., are a concern, but not every site need to be addressing that. You see, one could take a larger city level or a neighborhood level to figure out strategically what works well. So in the context of a very busy station and in a transition point, what you don't need is a Zen garden of sort. What it requires is an urban lounge. Imagine if you were to also see another need of strengthening the public realm is a well-designed, well-maintained, well-endowed seating, common working space, even providing free Wi-Fi and a good working desk. Could be also a way to strengthen the public nature of that. That can also bring joy, and as well as a more interpretation of Idomeneo would be good spirit. So it doesn't have to be necessarily a pastoral outlook to doing things. So I was just imagining an alternative possibility is to create the whole ground as a big urban lounge, where you can consume, you don't have to consume, but nevertheless a great, well-designed, well-endowed facility. And I don't. You quite often use the term pause, but that's a very Gillen townscapish way of looking at things. It's not pause. It can be even a destiny, and that's where you engage with Biju's comments. So even if it's a well-endowed space, it is it's used extensively by the neighborhood also. Not that people in transition, and also one has to understand that given the context in which hurriedly stations are used, what will be the nature of the interface. So you're creating a place in what's otherwise a transitionary space. So, and that can be possible based on what you provide and how it engages with the things around. And one could rethink station as just a city level facility and look at it even as a neighborhood connection. And both in terms of design and function and use, one could possibly relook at it. So it doesn't have to be, I think it's primarily because one thinks that good spirit and urbanness, or urban commons has to be only open. It's a sort of a pastoral vision. Try to bring a bit of the country into the city. The city can have its own inventions. And I think urban lounge and it's like, doing a great coffee shop, but free of cost. Of course, you pay for the coffee though, but to come and use the great lounge. It'll be a phenomenal facility. I would love that. And sometimes even I fancy doing that as a private project. Anyway, but coming to the river, I think again, I completely appreciate the concern of trying to expand the publicness of the city through facilities and so on. But you don't have to necessarily treat, and that's where again the previous two comments come in place, is that we don't get a sense of what part of the city this is. So in that sense, one is not able to appreciate whether these facilities are to be put in these places and so on and so forth. So so one could have conceptualized a little more in the context in which it's coming. I'm sure you'd have done it, but at least I couldn't see that coming. Second is also to a little more, because since we're emphasizing water, river, ecology systems, I think a little more grounding of the design on the topography, the nature of the water, the notion of the floods, whether the slopes are there, which is very much central to the manner. And one can even understand whether you can touch it so aggressively or do you have to touch it gently. How do you deal with water surface runoff and all that? So that part was missing in your effort to highlight the public nature of that space. Because even to just do those functions could be a great contribution to the city. And if you've seen, of course, people may criticize Ahmedabad riverfront for various reasons, but you should also see strategically sometimes the facilities are loaded on the land side also, not on the river side. So there is a road and you could see a little intense activity on the land side of the river and leave the river side a little gentler. Of course, for commercial reasons, they've done it differently at different places, but I'm just saying. So one could take a little sort of an extended view of this space and very strongly make the ecological argument in your intervention and show how you have responded and factored that. Thanks.
If the students want to respond, they may, but I'll have to ask you to keep it very brief.
Yeah, I'll just respond to like all the comments regarding the neighborhood study. Basically, maybe it's not reflected in my presentation because we had to keep it short, but all of the nature of the programs in the larger master plan which I had proposed were basically responding to the communities and the shorter neighborhood the river flows to. Like, for example, in the Sanjay Gandhi National Park, the programs respond to the communities residing there, which are the tribal communities. And then as you come out of the national forest, like the protected forest, they respond to the smaller Dhobi communities, or maybe at the creek says the Koli community which inhabited the space. So maybe that's not reflected in my presentation right now, but yeah, that's what I had thought about, like how I derived upon the programs and how it responds to that particular community. And then talking about even I agree with the part where my design per se does not engage with the river like tangentially, but that is a like conscious decision I took while sort of keeping it to the edge, and then the landscape can be left for that. So yeah, maybe I could have explored it further.
Hello. Thank you, panelists, for your really inquisitive comments. I'm really glad that there were the certain points that you covered in this discussion. Firstly, I would like to talk about the idea of joy in this specific thesis. The reason I called it constructing eudaimonia and not constructing happiness is because when I was developing on this idea, because I could feel it, but I was not able to define what I was inherently sensing. And I realized that happiness is actually of two kinds. One is hedonistic, where you are looking at luxury, you're looking at pleasure, you're looking at things that really excite you. And the second is the idea that you're somewhere and that these smaller moments that really make you, like, it makes you feel safe, it makes you feel good. I'm not saying that someone will sort of come into the space and someone's really sad and suddenly they'll feel excited. I'm saying that they'll feel comforted. And this is something that I have really, really felt. Like if you look at the different fabrics of Bombay, and if you've ever experienced Bombay, a walk through the fort precinct and a walk through Lower Parel, they are so distinct because of the kind of effort taken into building the fabric. And one walk in Lower Parel, I can assure you, is going to stress you out. Because the way that the fabric has been built up, there has not been enough consciousness of what can you do to sort of humanize this experience? And that is where my concern sort of came up. And that is what I wanted to look at when I'm looking at the idea of joy. The idea of joy for me is about an idea of well-being and health, because this is a conversation that really needs to come in the way that we look at the development of Bombay, in the way that we look at the development of infrastructure in Bombay, which is right now expanding at this insane, gigantic scale without really being conscious of how it's going to impact the community and the people that are going to be using it.
That would be my first point. Secondly, coming forward to the point that Biju Kuriakose put forward, which was really, really essential, and which was something that I had tried to put through in my research, but unfortunately may not have been able to come through in my presentation, was the study of scale. This is a question that really was a very big part of my inquiry and was something that I was to constantly keep thinking about is what scale and what should be the intervention when I'm saying that, oh, it's a stressed out city. Where do you sort of create a point of release? And for a point of release, all you maybe need is a chai tapri, which is a really tiny form which helps you relax after a day of work. You don't need a big mammoth. But I realized that when I'm talking to people and I'm asking people, oh, what is the point? And when I'm diagramming their daily lives, I realize what really frustrates people, what really frustrates a Mumbaikar is having to go to the station and taking the train. And I realized that a very big part of that conversation is the infrastructure of the train and the infrastructure of the station. So that is why when I looked at the entire precinct, when I was mapping the city in terms of stress, and I mapped Lower Parel, and then I was mapping and I was walking through the entire precinct and I was talking to people, which is what led to the development of the master plan. Also, I realized that intervening in the station could actually be a great opportunity to see how else could it be. And the reason why it needed to be Lower Parel station is because it's a 2-platform station. It's not a mega station like CST. A 2-platform station that is not able to service its people. Service it's the community which is around it, the residents that live by, the travelers that come by. And that is why it had to be an interesting point of intervention for me. Also, what is really important and what I was trying to explain in the meta level study of the city when I was looking at yard as a space of development. Earlier, the yards that were there from Lower Parel all the way till Dadar, they were used for docking of station cabins, for docking of trains. But over time, they have been shifted to Bombay Central. So you have this huge acre of land, which is right beside these stations, which are empty, which belong to the Railway Land Development Authority, in a fabric which is constantly in need of space. If you look at the Lower Parel map now.
Asmita, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up.
Yeah, so I was saying that if you look at even the map right now, it is a space which is in a dire need of having a conversation where, your open spaces need to be a part of your infrastructure now. And that is why I was looking at the multiple opportunities in which this could be achieved, where there was the idea of a quick movement where you don't have time to go to the yard, you don't have time to go to the main precinct, you just take a small route, quickest route, and you reach the station. The second was a normal movement, which was what I was trying to achieve as an urban lounge. And the third, the opportunity of the meander, which actually goes through the yard, was for the rare moment where someone has the space to freely move, to actually has a moment to sort of relax and enjoy the forest if that is of their choice, because that is their commodity, that is their urban common, which is available to them right there. And that is the point that I was trying to come forth. Thank you a lot of thanks. Yeah.
Thanks, Asmita, and thanks, Zai. And thank you, panelists, for your insightful responses to the presentations. We will now break for lunch and reconvene